It is, again, day 5 of outrage and discontent by furloughed government workers and the millions touched by the ripple effects of a government shutdown. These are just a few of the voices of the shutdown.
Go back up on the hill and do your work.
I'm terrified.
We have to make our groceries extend.
They're not thinking about us.
2-3 weeks instead of the 1 week that we have.
I'm out of work.
We're already down to the bare minimum.
The reason you are is Mr. Reed is... No, it's because the government won't do its job and pass a budget.
Let's hope they solve it and don't hurt too many people.
We'd rather be working.
There's a whole lot of people going to be suffering.
The Brain Trust is back. Christine Niedermeier from Straight Scoop Politics, syndicated columnist Bob Franken, Amy Holmes from The Blaze. So let's talk about this idea of opening the government piecemeal, the number of proposals that we've seen, these mini bills to reopen various parts of the federal government. According to Huffington Post, they include but are not limited to national parks, cancer research, Veterans and National Guard programs, FEMA, the National Weather Service, the Food and Drug Administration, nutrition and feeding programs for pregnant mothers and infants, Head Start as well. Aren't these the very programs the GOP's been trying to rein in? I mean, has this at this point, Amy, become all about posturing? You open all those programs, you've essentially reopened the federal government.
Well, you had a family on in an earlier segment about, talking to them about the real world consequences of this and not funding the NIH, for example, that their child is in a fatal situation here, or mortal, I should say. Potentially. And Harry Reid had the opportunity. He was asked by a rival network's journalist, why not fund NIH? And he said, well, why would we do that? We would do that right now because there are children suffering right now. It's shocking to me that this has become so petty, and so vindictive.
Such a much easier way to do this, and that is to stop interrupting for purely political reasons with the federal government. If you want to shut down some agencies, go through the legislative process to do that, the budget process. By the way, I'd like to mention here that my wife works for the federal government. She's with the Voice of America.
Full disclosure, thank you.
And yes, absolutely have to do that. She, however, is one of the essential people, so she's going to have to go back to work.
What say you to what Amy just said? Because that has been
a real family that needs real help.
But if you gave a rat's butt about real families, you wouldn't have shut down the government over it.
We know that House leadership passed a funding measure for the NIH, and we know that Senate Democrats rejected it. That's a fact, and it's on the table.
And this is what they're doing. They're just offering these amendments so they can get Democrats to vote against them and use them in the next election. It's all a game, number one. Number two, if they really cared about, it's not just people out of work. The Republicans say they care about government operating efficiently. Well, now they voted today to give back pay to all federal workers, which they should, but we're not getting any work for the money. We've got everything closed down in terms of food inspections and everything else. And just one last point before we go, if possible. You've got the ripple effect. You've got President Obama, who's canceled his 3rd trip now to Asia. You've got defense workers being furloughed at Sikorsky and now Lockheed Martin.
Why not fund the NIH now?
Because
why not?
Well, let's fund all of government. That's the responsible way to do things.
I want to play this piece of this ad, by the way, right now that's going to be running tomorrow during one of the national football games, one of the NFL games. This is an ad. Here's a snippet. We'll talk about it right after this. Take a look.
Speaker John Boehner didn't get his way on shutting down health care reform, so he shut down the government and hurt the economy.
The ad calling John Boehner a crybaby. Whatever your politics, it's actually a pretty clever ad. Is John Boehner going to be able to bounce back from this?
Well, first of all, I think it's a tiny bit unfair. To be honest with you, I know that that's not going to be a popular position, but the fact is that John Boehner was the one saying we shouldn't do this. But he has a faction in his party that is demanding this kind of thing.
But he has the power, Bob, to put the bill on the floor on Monday and get it passed in a bipartisan caucus, and he would discard the Hastert rule and not do it just with Republicans, it would pass tomorrow.
This is kind of a Machiavellian guy, and I suspect what he's trying to do is to look a couple of moves past the immediate one, which is to say, if he did that and totally antagonized the faction in his party, he's now risking a real problem with the even bigger problem, which is the possible default of the United States
But my
government.
question, do we have to have politics in football? Can't people just watch a football game?
Listen,
Maybe a couple of nip slips. I mean, come on.
You know what? But you raise an interesting point, Bob, because there are a lot of folks who have surmised that at the end of the day, what will end up happening is that as we get closer to October 17th, when this government runs out of money, that his hand will essentially be forced, and he'll be able to go back to Tea Party conservatives, and he will be able to say, listen, guys, the reality is, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, the market's going to crash, so the game's over now, and it becomes part of a comprehensive deal.
Well,
we don't have time for you to respond. Sorry. Christine Niedermeier, Bob Franken, Amy Holmes, big thanks to all of you. Thanks for coming in on a Saturday. I'll be back tomorrow, 3 o'clock Eastern. Up next, Karen Finney. She'll disrupt.